What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Book Binge on the King Crusoe YouTube channel. This week is episode 47, recording this a little bit ahead of time so that I don't forget too much, and because I have to record stuff ahead of time in case I have to move at some point, around the time that I would otherwise be recording this review. This week, we are covering American Psycho by Bret, Easton, Ellis, a book that several months back, I believe, even as far back as April or May, I decided I was going to read as a spooky season read in October, and boy am I glad that I decided to fit it in. Now, this review might be slightly more messy than some of my normal ones because I'm actually not doing this review based off of notes. I didn't have time to fully prepare the notes, so I'm instead kind of basing this off of several of the things that I said in my Goodreads review, which was honestly rather in depth, and that's part of the reason why I decided to do it this way. So most of the things that I wanted to bring up in this review, I brought up in the written review, so that's how I'm going to be covering this book. But first off, just do a little bit of introduction before I actually get into the good and the bad. I loved American Psycho. Now, it's kind of weird that I did, because frankly, if I tried to read this, I think even just like 6 months ago, I probably would have hated it. Like, for whatever reason, what this book is going for in terms of tone and whatnot is very particular. So the fact that I loved it so much was surprising. But people who've seen my Goodreads review know that I only rated it 4 stars, even though I'm going to be gushing about this pretty much the entire way. The truth behind that is that I really don't know why I'm rating it only 4 stars instead of 5, especially with how much I enjoyed it. For whatever reason, 4 stars just feels like the right score, and we're going to kind of get into that as I mention up some things in the good and the bad. So I guess we can probably go ahead and start off in that section, starting off with the good, or at least the best elements of it. It's really kind of I don't even know if I want to do this normal review structure with the best elements and the worst elements of the review, because it's really hard to talk about the best elements and the worst elements of American Psycho without bringing up pretty much every element of the book in both categories. Because if you like what it's trying to do, you're going to like the book, or love it like I did. But if you don't like what it's trying to do, you're going to hate the book and think that it's one of the worst things ever written. So yeah, I actually don't think I'm actually going to go into this style. I'm just going to kind of go through what I mostly said in my Goodreads review. I absolutely loved American Psycho, but if I were to take a gander as to the elements that could be contributing to why I personally rated it as 4 stars instead of 5, as I kind of brought up just a little bit earlier in the review, one of the things that makes this book so particular in terms of what it is going for, there's so many like name brands, so many drops and uh, lots of clothing descriptions throughout the book and brand callouts. It solidifies the type of tone that the book is going for, and especially puts really makes clear the type of character that Patrick Bateman is as the narrator. But if you have no idea what any of those brands are or any of the specifications of what those clothes mean and whatnot, there's going to be a little bit of struggle with that. That was something that I had a problem with. There are so many clothes brands, dropped and named throughout the entirety of the book, essentially, that I was just like, I have no idea what this character, what Patrick Bateman as the narrator, and what Easton or Bret Easton Ellis as the author are bringing up are. I don't know anything about any of this stuff, but it's selling the tone so well that I can't help but love it anyway. But that is an element that I think might be contributing to me wanting to rate it a little bit lower, because I don't think that pretty much anybody who reads this book is going to know, half of the brands or half of the clothing descriptions, if that many, reading the book. Unless you are somebody who, thrives on expensive, fancy clothes, you're not going to understand anything that is in here, I don't think, at least just based off of my personal knowledge. It is very much narrated by a Wall Street buff who knows a lot of clothes and very much takes pride in appearance and, having the expensive stuff more so than, other stuff that most normal people would take pride in. So there is that element. That's something that some people might struggle with. Even I struggled with, but still somehow didn't really hinder my experience too much. But furthermore, in a proper sense, there isn't really a plot to American Psycho. It is as much as a slice of life, the slice of life of a lunatic psychopathic murderer can be, you know, plot driven, this book is. It's just kind of bits and pieces of days out of Patrick Bateman's life that are just kind of written in the book. It's almost as if it's a diary format to a certain extent, the way that it's written. And the book is more focused on the goal of making the reader wonder what things happened in the story were actually real and what if it was fake, what elements were real and what elements were fake, and what stuff was just completely made up, that sort of thing. And also, as a result of there being no technically proper plot, there's also not really an ending to the book either. There's not really a conflict being resolved in the way that you would traditionally think of a plot having a conflict to resolve. And any, resolution that does occur at the end of this book is mostly in, well, it's not even at the end. Any resolution that does occur in this book at all is mostly in the way that these slow, subtle revelations, why do I keep saying that? Revelations of Patrick Bateman's character possibly making up part of, or most of, or maybe even all of the story start to happen. As you go through the book, there are little hint drops in the first half that are just like, well, some of this is clearly happening in Bateman's head, not actually happening in real life. But as you start to get to the end of the book, there are certain things that were, pretty major points that happened earlier in the book that was just like, so maybe that wasn't actually real, maybe that didn't actually happen, question mark, or maybe it actually happened, but Bateman twisted it in a way that, fit his narrative, so to speak, and wasn't fully true, but wasn't fully a lie either. That's what this book is going for. There's not really a plot, technically. It's more about making the reader question what is real and what isn't, and also just being in the head of Bateman as a psychopathic lunatic. And even beyond these points, there are also a couple other things about American Psycho that make it very hard for me to be like, well, I recommend this book. There are few things that are just like, okay, well, it's kind of hard to recommend because of this. The first reason is that the first half of this book is surprisingly tame, but the back half is shockingly graphic. There are several sex and murder scenes in the back half of this book, especially. It's right around the halfway point that the first one of these that is super explicit in kind of a disturbing way happens. And it's like, I can't really recommend this to pretty much anybody because unless you really like torture, well, torture porn, I guess to a certain extent, but unless you are a fan of, gore fests of films or stuff like that, there are scenes in this book that are rather disturbing, very graphic, and it's just like, ugh. And even while reading, I'm just like, why is this happening? It just like really grossed me out having to read it, even though it was still fun to read it's really weird. It's like kind of an oxymoronic, you know, conflict within me in how much I enjoyed this book. There were some scenes that I read and I was just like, why do I enjoy this book so much? Why am I praising this book so much when it has this scene in it? There are some rather intense and graphic scenes in the book that make it pretty much impossible to recommend to anybody, to be quite honest. And of course, I guess it didn't really help the fact that, like I said, the first half of the book is pretty tame. There's not very much of this happening. So the first half of the book was when I was praising it so much, just like, this book is selling the tone so well, and I just love it. I love everything about this book. And then the really disturbing stuff started happening in the back half, and I'm just like, well, I still love this book, but holy cow, is it making me uncomfortable? So there's that, and then there's the other element that I've kind of hinted at so far in the review already, the tone. The tone and stylistic decisions of this book are so particular and go a long way in selling the book on that specific feeling while reading. That what really made me love the book was just how specific it was, how particular this was. For whatever reason, just whatever the book was going for clicked for me. And if it clicks for you as a reader, you're going to pretty much love the book because of that. But if you don't click with the vibe, I very much have the strong feeling that you're going to loathe this book and just really not enjoy it or straight up hate it or wonder what in the world is wrong with people's brains who do enjoy the book. It's one of those types of things to me. But with all that being said, I did jive with this book super hard, a feeling that was strengthened by the fact that I had initially feared before starting the book that I would dislike it or hate it or maybe even DNF it because of all the things that I had heard about it being super particular in tone and about it being pretty graphic at times. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go into this not expecting to enjoy it much, but expecting to have, some sort of fun time in certain sections, I guess. But then the entire thing just worked for me super well, even though its brutal nature and, quite frankly, it's boring. This book is a slog, but I loved it. It was so enjoyable to be able to read through the stuff. Just Bateman as a narrator made everything so enjoyable to read, even though a lot of what was happening, especially in the first half of the book, was super boring. It's like, why does any of this matter? Like, why do I care? And fact of the matter is that a lot of it doesn't matter, and a lot of it you shouldn't care about. But Bateman is so enticing as a narrator that you're just like, okay, well, I want to see what the psychopath sees anyway. It's really weird. Like I said, it's kind of a conflict within myself as a reader that I don't know why I enjoyed it so much, but I did. Plus, I gotta be honest, I thought American Psycho as a book was hilarious. I'm not somebody who laughs out loud when I read. I'm not somebody who finds a lot of things within books particularly funny. Even if something is funny, I might like crack a sort of half smile or maybe like chuckle once or do, one of those infamous, blowing air out through the nose when something is funny. No, I actually had to laugh out loud at the absurdity of a couple things in this book, especially with Patrick's bluntness, whether or not that bluntness was actually real within the context of the story or not, in a few places. I laughed while reading this book. That is not something that I do. Of course, I also can mention like Reen as a friend who read this book. Reen is somebody who does actually laugh out loud at sections of various different books that he has read. And of course, I haven't read that many books that are considered to be really funny, but a lot of things that are meant to be funny in terms of books, I tend to not like fully laugh at. Like, I'll get a joke and think it's funny, but I won't legitimately laugh. This one made me laugh. So as a result, I kind of have to be like, well, if you're a fan of like absurd stuff happening, and it's not even like it's super absurd in the way that I imagine Discworld is absurd, but for whatever reason, the absurdity of some of the statements that Patrick said, I just thought were hilarious. So there is that. And then finally, I guess probably the thing that I think makes this book work so well is Patrick Bateman as a first person narrator. Now, what's interesting is the first chapter of the book, I don't think you actually get the idea that Patrick Bateman is the main character, let alone a first person narrator, until a decent bit into that first chapter. Like, it takes probably halfway through the chapter before you realize, oh, Patrick Bateman is at the book, or is in the book at the very beginning of the book and is actually narrating first person, but he doesn't refer to himself until about halfway through. The rest of it is him narrating the actions of another character beside him as if he's a third person narrator. And I thought that was super interesting because it was kind of like a, like it wasn't really a twist. It was just something that I was reading and I was just like, okay, so I guess Patrick Bateman comes into the book later. But then it becomes obvious halfway through the first chapter that, oh wait, he's actually the first person narrator of the book. I thought that was really unique. But then Bateman's narration throughout the entire thing is just super fun. I loved it so much. And something else that I think is fun as well, even though I haven't actually watched American Psycho, the film, yet, I do know quite a bit about the film and have seen various different snippets because, to be frank, pretty much the entirety of that movie is a meme. Every scene from that movie has been made into a GIF at some point in time for a good reason because there are plenty of fantastic moments like that. I'm surprised at how good of an adaptation that movie is based off of the snippets that I've seen. There are several scenes in this book that I'm like, okay, well that wasn't in the movie, or that probably wouldn't be in the movie. Like a lot of this could be skipped, and that's probably true for most of the scenes in the book. Don't get me wrong, but there are tons of moments that are just like, oh wait, that actually is in the movie and is in there line for line, or actions that are made like that are told in the page actually happen line for line in the book. And I just thought that that was super cool. The movie seems to be, a pretty good adaptation, at least based off what I've seen. And I'm excited to watch the full thing to see just how, faithful it is, because it seems to be surprisingly faithful. And that really shocks me given the nature of this book. And additionally, if you're a fan of what the movie is going for in terms of tone and stylistic decisions, again, so far as I am aware, I feel like you're already halfway to enjoying this book, because the movie does go for a specific tone and style that is, hard to enjoy if you're not entirely clued into what's going on. And I have a very hard time watching movies because of awkward moments. If I find something to be awkward to watch, I have a hard time watching it. But because I've read this book and gone through all of the awkwardness of Patrick Bateman as the narrator here, I feel like I can watch the movie and more like point at the screen and be like, hey, I know that scene, and then just kind of laugh at it rather than feeling awkward. So if you have watched the movie and you enjoyed the movie, you're already partway there to enjoying the book. The book is just super particular. So, like I said, it's impossible for me to recommend this book. Like it really is impossible. I can't recommend American Psycho to pretty much anybody, but if there are any sorts of elements of the book that I think sound interesting to you, or like I said, if you've enjoyed the movie, I think you should go ahead and give it a shot. It's hard to recommend the book to anybody, but I at the same time recommend most people to try reading it at some point in their life, so long as they have a strong stomach and can take some of the disturbing stuff that happens occasionally in the book. Because if you do click with this book, you are going to love it. If you don't click with the book, that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to be offended by that personally because, like I said, it's super particular. I loved it, but I don't have a problem if anybody else doesn't love it. So I recommend everybody to check it out just to see if they would love it, because I did not anticipate me loving American Psycho nearly as much as I did before I started reading. But I'm very glad that I did, even though it made me feel gross and wrong in a couple different sections. So that's the end of my review. Obviously, I had to gush a lot about this book, even though I was also listing a bunch of stuff that are just like, well, this is impossible to recommend because of this, or this has a few problems that people are going to have with it because of this. Even so, I still love the book. So if you have read the book, go ahead and, tell me your experience with it in the comments below, because man, it's going to be one of those that are just like, well, what in the world? I feel like everybody's going to have kind of a different reaction to the book. So, a lot of my friends who I read it alongside with, I know some of the feelings that you guys had, but feel free to drop them in the comments below anyway, because the more people who express their thoughts, especially if they enjoyed the book in the comments below, the more people who potentially watch this video might consider picking it up as a result of multiple of us saying, well, it's kind of disturbing in places, but it was really fun. So that's really kind of the conclusion to this. American Psycho was a super fun book, despite the elements of it that make it technically boring or disturbing. I just had such a fun time reading it. So that's the end of this video. Thank you guys for sticking around and watching. I really appreciate all the support that I've been getting on my channel. I've been getting tons of watch hours recently, and it's super crazy to me that I relevant enough to any of my friends for people to consider watching my videos all the time. So I greatly appreciate any and all of that support, especially as maybe I'm moving to a different place, my own place here, somewhere around the time that this video is releasing, or maybe I already have moved. Not quite sure what's going on with all of that yet, but it really is how it is. So I appreciate you guys for watching the videos. I'll be back again next week with whatever I'm covering. Again, I'm not actually entirely sure what it is I am covering because of the way that I'm having to record stuff. So thank you guys for watching. I'll be back again next week.